What if I told you that mainstream history has been feeding you a ghost story for over a century? A tale of mysterious invaders, alien-like warriors appearing from nowhere, destroying the most advanced civilization the ancient world had ever built, and then vanishing like smoke. Every documentary, every textbook, every museum exhibit has been selling you this narrative. But here is the problem. The physical evidence does not support it. The genetic sequencing does not support it. And the material analysis of the actual archaeological record actively contradicts it. Today, we are opening the case file on the Bronze Age collapse. We are going through the evidence the way an intelligence analyst goes through a crime scene. And what we are going to find will completely reframe everything you thought you knew about one of history's greatest unsolved catastrophes. Stay with me, because the deeper we go into this investigation, the more uncomfortable the truth becomes. Let us start with what was actually operating in the Eastern Mediterranean around 1300 BCE. Because without understanding the system, you cannot understand the collapse. Think of it as a Bronze Age version of the modern American supply chain. You have got Egypt playing the role of the agricultural heartland, the grain supplier, feeding the network. You have got Cyprus functioning like a raw materials depot, shipping copper across trade routes the way US steel mills once fed Detroit. You have got the Hittite Empire in Anatolia running something analogous to a northern industrial complex. And threading everything together, you have got Ugarit, a Levantine coastal city, operating essentially as the ancient world's version of a major logistics hub, the Memphis of its day, but for international trade. Material analysis of the Uluburun shipwreck recovered off the Turkish coastline in 1984 confirms this directly. A single vessel carrying copper ingots from Cyprus, tin from Afghanistan, amber from the Baltic, ivory from Africa, Greek pottery, Egyptian grain. This ship is not an outlier. Material examination of the cargo tells us this was routine. This was the system operating normally. Now here is where the data anomaly appears. To produce the bronze that armed their militaries, every major power in the Eastern Mediterranean depended on tin. And the genetic analysis of trade records, meaning the cuneiform tablets we have recovered, confirms that virtually all of this tin originated in Afghanistan. Think about what that means logistically. The substance required to manufacture the M1 Abrams tank equivalent of the ancient world was being sourced from the opposite end of the continent, traveling thousands of kilometers through mountain passes and desert roads before it ever reached a smithy in Greece or Egypt or Hatti. The chariots those kingdoms deployed were not just weapons. They were the physical expression of a military-industrial complex that required every link in a transcontinental supply chain to function simultaneously. Remove the tin flow, and you do not just slow the army. You ground it completely. Now we open the climate file, and this is where the evidence gets genuinely disturbing. Paleoclimatological data extracted from lakebed sediment cores across the Eastern Mediterranean reveals a catastrophic pattern beginning around 1200 BCE. Pollen samples taken from sites across Cyprus, Greece, and the Levant show a dramatic collapse in agricultural pollen signatures. What that means, in plain language, is that the crops stopped growing. Lab analysis of these pollen records indicates a prolonged and severe arid period, a mega drought that hammered the region for multiple consecutive decades. For the Hittite Empire, already occupying highland terrain that required optimal rainfall to sustain its population, this was not an agricultural inconvenience. This was a grid-down scenario. The food supply dropped off a cliff, and cuneiform tablets from Egypt confirm that Hatti was sending emergency grain requests to the pharaoh with increasing desperation during exactly this period. A superpower was begging for food. That is how bad the climate data was. Seismological investigation adds another layer to the investigative picture. Structural analysis of destruction horizons had multiple sites across Greece, Anatolia, Syria, and the Levant reveals something that academics spent decades glossing over. Many of these destruction layers show signatures consistent with seismic damage rather than deliberate burning. The collapse was not just happening politically or economically. The literal ground was shaking apart beneath the civilization. And here's the detail that investigators should find extremely significant. Egypt sits outside the primary seismic zone that absorbed these shocks. That geographical fact may be the single most important variable explaining why Egypt survived when everything around it did not. Now we get to what the mainstream story calls the Sea Peoples. And this is where the cover-up narrative collapses under rigorous scientific scrutiny. The Egyptian sources at Medinet Habu describe waves of foreign warriors, coalition forces in feathered headdresses and horned helmets, arriving by sea and destroying everything in their path. And for generations, historians treated this account essentially at face value. Alien invaders from nowhere, mystery peoples from beyond the known world. The problem is that when you run this narrative against the actual material analysis, it does not hold. These were not people from outside the system. A deep audit of the archaeological record shows Sea Peoples warriors appearing in Egyptian service as mercenaries for centuries before the so-called invasion. The Sherden, identified by their distinctive horned helmets, were serving as Ramesses II's personal royal bodyguard. You do not hire alien invaders to protect the pharaoh. These were known actors within the Bronze Age world, operating across its military labor market for generations. This is the point in the investigation where the classified evidence, by classified, I mean the DNA data that upended everything. A landmark genetic sequencing study focused on burials at Ashkelon, one of the major Philistine cities on the southern Levantine coast, produced results that the academic world was not prepared for. Researchers extracted ancient DNA from skeletal remains spanning the transition from the Bronze Age into the Iron Age, specifically targeting the period immediately following the collapse. The extraction methodology centered on teeth and inner ear bone structures, the anatomical sites where biological material survives longest through millennia of soil contact. What the genetic sequencing revealed was unambiguous and quantifiably significant. The earliest Iron Age burials at Ashkelon contained individuals carrying a clear signal of Southern European and Aegean ancestry. Ancestry that was simply absent in the Canaanite population, occupying the same region in the preceding Bronze Age layers. This was not a marginal data variance. This was a genuine biological discontinuity, a biological anomaly in the human genome that marked the arrival of a distinct incoming population.
The direction that ancestry signal pointed was toward the Aegean world, consistent with archaeological arguments connecting the Philistines, the Peliset of Egyptian records, to the Mycenaean Greek cultural sphere. For the first time, the pottery evidence and the genetic evidence were simultaneously pointing the same direction. But here is where the declassified narrative takes its most revealing turn. Within 2 to 3 generations, that distinct European genetic signature begins to attenuate. By the later Iron Age layers at Ashkelon, the signal has been substantially absorbed into the surrounding Levantine population. These people did not remain a sealed biological community. They integrated, they intermarried, and within a few generations, their descendants were genetically indistinguishable from the regional population. The invaders became the locals, and the DNA proves it. Genetic sequencing of ancient Sardinian remains from the Nuragic period adds critical biological context. Bronze Age Sardinian populations carried a distinct ancestral signature, setting them apart from contemporary Italian mainland populations, with connections extending across the Mediterranean. The Shurden connection to Sardinia, long argued on the basis of bronze figurines bearing striking visual similarities to the Medinet Habu reliefs, now has biological weight behind it rather than resting purely on artistic comparison. But the most important finding in the entire genetic dataset is what is absent. There is no unified genetic signature running across all the named Sea Peoples groups. No shared biological marker tying the Shurden to the Peliset, to the Luca, to the Ekwesh. They were not a single nation. They were not a coordinated invasion force from a common homeland. The Egyptian sources were, in this case, accidentally accurate. They really were a coalition of distinct peoples. The glaring contradiction is that mainstream history treated coalition as synonymous with mystery, when the genetics reveal something far more coherent. These people came from inside the Bronze Age system. They were products of its trade networks, its mercenary traditions, its centuries of maritime connection. The genetic sequencing confirms what the most rigorous archaeological analysis have already implied. When you examine destruction patterns at multiple collapse-era sites, a deeply unsettling physical detail emerges. Palace structures burned, surrounding settlements did not. That is not the signature of an outside force sweeping through indiscriminately. That is the signature of a population that knew exactly what it wanted to destroy. When supply chains collapse, when famine hits, when the government that taxed you for generations cannot protect you from the drought or the earthquake or the raiders, you stop protecting the government. The Bronze Age grid went down from the inside. The final lab result of this entire investigation is not comfortable for the mainstream narrative, but the evidence demands it. The Bronze Age collapse was not an alien invasion. It was a system failure. A hyper-globalized, deeply interconnected civilization that had optimized itself for prosperity became catastrophically brittle when multiple simultaneous stressors hit the network at the same time. Climate shock disrupted agriculture. Seismic events destroyed infrastructure. Tin supply disruption paralyzed the military-industrial complex. Internal populations turned on palace economies that had failed them. And into that cascading grid-down scenario, waves of displaced, desperate people moved across the Mediterranean looking for somewhere to land. The Sea Peoples were not the cause of the collapse. They were its most visible symptom, and the DNA proves they came from the same world that fell apart around them. The warriors, carved into the limestone at Medinet Habu, have stood frozen for 3,000 years, without names or biology or origins. The genetic sequencing finally gave them back their humanity. These were traceable people, carrying Aegean ancestry into the Levant, whose descendants are measurably present in the regional gene pool today. The Bronze Age collapse was not delivered from outside by forces humanity had never encountered. It was generated from within, by the same interconnected, brilliant, and ultimately fragile system that had built the most sophisticated world the ancient Earth had ever seen. They built it, they broke it, they survived it, and in the most literal, biological sense, the DNA allows us to confirm they became us.
The case file is open. The evidence has been reviewed. The mainstream story was wrong.